Salutations, Imperial citizens and battle brothers. I must apologize for taking this long to make the video. I had other things to take care of. But now I'm back and ready to talk about my experience at the Firebug Open GT. Did my predictions pay off? Did I play well? Are 3 hours of sleep enough? Let's find out together. The venue at the Hotel Radisson Blu was nothing short of excellent. The rooms were luxurious, the food was great, and all the staff were really pleasant. The Firebug organizers also did an outstanding job setting up all the tables, getting all the sponsors, and making sure everyone had a good time. To recap, this is the list we decided to bring after much testing. It is an Ultramarines army playing a Vanguard Spearhead detachment. Marneus Calgar and an Apothecary Biologus with the Blade-driven Deep enhancement are leading a big unit of Eradicators. They gain Infiltrate, so they start the game in a threatening position. While they could be used for a turn 1 Alpha Strike, this unit acts more like a deterrent and tells your opponent to stay away. Calgar provides you a flexible melee threat and generates command points. Uriel Ventress and the company heroes serve as our home field unit and late game brawler. This unit is deceptively durable and does pretty well in close combat too. Uriel Ventress gives our next unit the Deep Strike ability, which allows us to perform a variety of tricky plays with it. Our big break unit of 6 Centurion Devastators is here for their firepower. They obliterate tough targets, hordes, and anything in between with their built-in rerolls. They are also incredibly tough and benefit defensively from the Vanguard detachment bonus. The reason why nobody uses this unit elsewhere is because the Centurions are really slow. They only move 4 inches, which this detachment gets around with guerrilla tactics. Guerrilla tactics puts them back into reserve, and you can redeploy them into an advantageous position every single turn. Our anti-tank is rounded out by 2 units of 3 Eradicators. These usually start the game in strategic reserves and come in at opportune moments to shoot small vehicles, like transports. Eradicators also come with built-in rerolls, so they do not require Oath of Moment to do work, and as a cheap free model unit, they are also excellent screens and action monkeys. Speaking of firepower, we bring a total of 12 Inceptors. A big 6 model brick with Plasma Exterminators, 3 more Plasma Exterminators, and a unit of 3 with Assault Bolters. Inceptors can choose to deep strike 3 inches away instead of the normal 9 inches, which makes them difficult to screen out and allows them to drop damage with their wound rerolling guns for high damage plays. The Bolter unit, while weaker, is very good at killing singular characters like assassins or other lone operatives. Afterwards, they can look for mission play opportunities. Our list is rounded out by said mission playing units. 3 units of scouts and a Custodes assassin. All of these units can leave the battlefield and return to strategic reserves, which means it is very easy for these units to avoid bad engagements and score victory points. Let's get into the event and see how we do. Round 1. Orks. We start off really strong. Our opponent was ranked number 1 with Orks in 2023, and we are facing his Ork army now. I went second, and despite the fact that going second into Orks is a recipe for a bad time, I honestly quite liked it due to the mission being Purge the Foe. This mission rewards the second player because the second player always knows how many units to kill for extra points. In this matchup, I was able to use Oath of Moment defensively. While normally an offensive tool to increase your damage, it is also viable to put Oath of Moment on units to discourage them from moving. I did this here to a squad of Stormboys, to prevent them from tagging my Centurions in combat. Centurions cannot escape or shoot once they engage in melee, so making sure they can punch 5 stray Orks to death just in case was valuable enough. The key moment in this game was charging into the center and confidently tanking the damage of a big mob of Orks with 2 characters in it. Thanks to Calgar's Victrix Guard and their 2-up save, we were able to shrug off most of the damage. Across the game, I was able to avoid engagements and pick off key units from afar. We end the game with a victory. Round 2. Thousand Suns. After a restless night, we awake to our first matchup of day 2, Thousand Suns. This was the first of many unfortunate games played on the bad layout. I will bring this up frequently. My opponent was a really funny guy. We hit it off straight from the start and started to immediately goof around and trash talk. Great guy and really great fun. I lost this game due to taking a calculated risk. Turns out I am bad at math. On turn 1, I poked my Centurions out to blast away some cultists to score a secondary card. My opponent looked at the board, did some measurements and decided to commit into killing them. One thing you have to know about Thousand Suns is they are one of, if not the most damaging army in the game. So my opponent went defense down on Magnus, threw him out in the open and spent most of the available Cabal points on a big damage turn against the Centurions. Ahriman turned off my save and Magnus went in, all damage buffs up. At the end, I lost 5 out of 6 Centurions and half of the Inceptors I rapid ingressed as a distraction. This is a big loss, but it was actually really risky, because now Magnus the Red was standing out in the open and Calgar's boys were ready to deliver the vengeance. So I advanced Calgar out, tanked Ahriman's Flamer Overwatch, and then failed spectacularly. I completely whiffed with every Eradicator on the board and the Inceptors, including close combat, and Magnus survived on 4 wounds. Had this attack succeeded, my opponent would have been left with a few solo characters and a few Rubric Marines with Flamers. But you only have 1 day to be mad about dice. So what was the correct play? I think it's pretty simple. Bunker down and play the chipping game. You see, the mission we played was priority targets. This mission massively favors the player going second, and I just happened to be the one going second. The correct approach to this game would have been to play patiently and hide until the end game, while killing the cheaper resources. The Centurions should have at least killed one of the 10 model units with characters attached to deliver a massive play against the Cabal point economy. And once the Disc Sorcerers and the damage capable units are dead, Magnus can't win the game by himself anymore. My biggest misplay was definitely using rapid ingress on 6 Inceptors. I wanted to threaten Magnus and distract my opponent from hitting the Centurions, but it turns out that just killing the Centurions and tying the Inceptors up in combat was good enough. Instead, I should have rapid ingressed the 3 Eradicators into the same spot I entered them in from reserves. This way I could have moved them in my turn for some melter range and deployed the second squad in the same spot the first one walked out of. On the plus side, I killed Ahriman with a retreat grenade. Round 3. Ultramarines Vanguard Spearhead. Out of the 165 people at the tournament, only 2 players dared to show up with the Vanguard Spearhead. You can imagine the humor experienced when you hit the 2.5% chance and get matched into the other person playing the same army. Indeed, we are in for a mirror match. My opponent brought a list which resembled an earlier version of mine. Aggressors instead of eradicators, the full 15 inceptors, and some infiltrators to block reserves. I have to be honest here, in my initial analysis, I thought my opponent had the edge here. Infiltrators are valuable tools and none of my eradicators have any targets to reroll wounds against. Turns out, I was slightly off. I got the first turn, which was beneficial because that meant my opponent had to adjust to my reserves rather than me to his. Next, even though my opponent had a higher density of damage with the 3 extra Inceptor models, I had more units, which caused issues in target priority. I managed to drop my damage dealers in the right places to win the fights and constantly stay on top of the unit count. My best play in this game was a rapid ingress. I dedicated my own 6 model Inceptor units solely to the purpose of beating my opponent's Centurions. I held my Centurions in reserves and baited the enemy Centurions into shooting Calgar's unit. I took a notable amount of damage, but now the Centurions were here, and I rapid ingressed my Inceptor brick and tied them up in combat. With a 10-inch movement after staying 3 away, that means I can easily engineer this scenario my opponent wasn't prepared for. This led to my Centurions being able to shoot everything to death from this point forward, while my opponent's Centurions meagerly attempted to punch 6 Gravis bodies to death. Victory for the true Ultramarines, and the 3rd time I have beaten the mirror match. We march for McCrag. Round 4. Chaos Demons. The last game of day 2 was the game I feel the worst about. It was a really unfortunate combination of luck, terrain, and poor decision making from my end. My opponent was on Chaos Demons, running a Nurgle and Khorne combination of units to get the most out of keyword synergies. Even though I own Chaos Demons myself, I never played against them since their surge in popularity. That meant I was not familiar with how the durability of their monsters feels in practice. This game was kind of a disaster for me. My Centurions only shot once the entire game because the terrain wouldn't allow me to draw any lines of sight to anything. The demons were content with sitting behind walls and were rewarded with all the good secondary cards. My opponent drew all the easy cards in the first few rounds. Secure no man's land, cleanse, area denial, etc. While I was stuck with assassinate, no prisoners, bring it down. The luck of the draw forced me to get aggressive or the stalemate would end in my loss. So I decided to attack the greater demons in a wave. I threw 9 plasma inceptors down and shot at Scarbrand, leaving it at 4 wounds. On the crackback I lost essentially all inceptors to Rotigus Flamers. My eradicators popped into bad angles to get a few shots off while Calgar ran out to kill Rotigus. And just like against Magnus, I completely flunked my attack rolls while my opponent made all the saves. That's pretty much where the game ended. I had an opportunity to deny my opponent some primary because my opponent used the 3-inch away stratagem to steal an objective from me by putting 1 player bearer on it. I told my opponent to watch out because I had enough space to fit some Bolterceptors on the objective with rapid ingress. You don't have to tell your opponent about this, but I always do. No gotchas on my watch. It's a bit of an annoying loss because on any other terrain layout my Centurions would have been able to scoop every single one of the expensive infantry units off the table in less than a second, but alas, fortune wasn't with the Sons of Gilliman this day. Round 5. Astra Militarum. It's the last day of the GT. After a very restful sleep and a great breakfast, I was wondering if I would finish the event with a negative record after all. So I decided to give it my all in the next round, which featured an unusual mission combination: the ritual on Scrambler fields. This means instead of taking objectives already on the table, both players would have to put them down during the game. Furthermore, nothing coming out of reserves or infiltration can be within objective markers either. This isn't amazing for an army like mine, which is built around deep strike and reserve plays, but I genuinely think it isn't a big issue. My opponent's home objective isn't worth any points, which means there is no reason to deep strike onto it, and you can still place new objective with your reserve units. My opponent was the Imperial Guard, featuring a take-all-comers list with some infantry, some battle tanks, some indirect fire, and 7 characters. I take mention of the characters because I indeed took fixed secondaries for the first and only time of the event. Most of the players opted to take Cleanse, because it is actually possible to cleanse 2 objectives at the same time on this mission, provided your unit can spread the 9-inch gap between your player-placed objectives. That said, I personally believe this plan isn't great if your opponent goes really aggressive to prevent you from making time to cleanse and put down an objective marker. Because of that worry, I went for the tried and true deploy teleport homers plus assassinate plan, and it worked out fine. I got to go first and put the pressure on. I avoided spending any command points on battle tactics turn 1 to dodge the enemy Custodes, went into position and deployed my small eradicator units on the table to threaten the sentinels and tanks. The Centurions went into deep strike to dodge indirect fire. On turn 2, I blew up a large infantry unit, killed the Custodes assassin, and used Calgar aggressively to tie up a lot of things on the enemy front lines. My opponent had to step back and deal with my army, neglecting to perform the mission critical actions. One of the things I wanted to highlight was the tank commander. Imperial tank commanders are threatening tanks with a wide array of painful guns and the ability to shoot on death. Models like this often cause a bit of player paralysis. I often observe players refuse to attack these models because they are afraid of being shot back. The problem with this approach, in my opinion, is that a dead tank commander shoots you once, while a living tank commander shoots you for 5 turns. Just kill the tank commander. Ideally, you would do it in close combat or from far away to avoid the shots altogether, but when these strategies aren't possible, I recommend you just kill it. Take the hit now and be glad it won't happen after this time. The Scions of Guilliman are victorious and now on a 3-2 record. That means no matter what happens, I cannot go into the negative anymore and the pressure has evaporated. Round 6. Adeptus Custodes. My last opponent of the event was actually a regular at our local scene. We jokingly bantered throughout the weekend during breaks because despite knowing each other for almost 3 years, we never had the chance to play against each other. Turns out, the day finally arrived. The enemy army went a bit deeper on the unit spread than usual for Custodes and eschewed many Forge World models. I genuinely thought this matchup could be a bit rough, because Wardens and their ability to blank a shooting phase with their Feel No Pain seems to be a very effective way to deal with my essentially all-shooting army. It turns out, my worries were somewhat misplaced because the game turned out to be relatively simple to solve. Not due to a lack of skill or luck from my opponent. It just happened that my army vastly outmaneuvered the 6-inch foot-slocking Custodians, and to my luck, the damage-free Inceptor guns and the Centurions matched up wonderfully against the Custodian stat lines, taking them to their worst possible save and destroying them immediately. The Custodians led the scoreboard for the earlier turns because I essentially gave them control over the center, which traditionally isn't a winning play in 40k. The Vanguard, however, not being a traditional army, turned this into an acceptable plan. I spent the early turns barely keeping up on the scores while dealing with one unit at the time. I successfully baited the Warden units to use the Filner Paints early, killed brick by brick with my heavy hitters, and once destroyed the enemy Custodes, I had Vect superiority. I caught up on the score in the late game and led the Ultramarines to a positive finish. In the end, we went 4-2 and placed 45th out of 156 players. That means we made it into the top third of all attendees, and I also got nominated and won Best in Faction for Ultramarines. You should be able to see my little plaque right here. So how did I enjoy the Ultramarine Vanguard? The answer is simple. I absolutely love the army. Everything this list can do is amazing, and almost everything that went wrong was in my ability to avoid. However, the Vanguard might not have been the correct army to take to this event. Not only is the Necron matchup still dubious, playing 4 out of 6 games on terrible terrain layouts for this kind of army certainly didn't help. The Vanguard also taxes your mental fortitude to play well and properly. People who struggle to get enough sleep and mentally slip after 3 games in one day might want to take a simpler army. After the event, I had to take a break for my Ultramarine Vanguard and went with some exploits with a Black Templar list to cool my head a bit, but I will definitely come back to this army very soon and quite possibly tell all of you more about it. I want to thank everyone who played practice games with me, everyone who brainstormed my unit choices for the final list, the friend who gave me a ride to the hotel, as well as everybody who encouraged me to purchase a ticket in the first place. Courage and honor. We march for McCragg.